Hey there, YouTubers! Araceli here, and I am so excited to present another narration production I've been working on with author James Glass called Minutes to Midnight, a Rebecca Watson novel, Book 2. This book has been one of the more enjoyable projects I've had the privilege of working on, and I'm sharing the beginning chapters of it here with you. We are still working on completing the entire book, but once it's ready to go for distribution on all the major audiobook retailers such as Audible, Amazon, and Apple Books, I will attach the link here below so you can continue listening to the adventure. I will admit, this is my favorite project so far, as the story is enthralling with twists and turns across the many chapters. Let me know what you think of it in the comments below. Opening credits. Minutes to Midnight, a Rebecca Watson novel, Book 2. Written by James Glass. Narrated by Araceli Gote. Chapter 1. Samantha, Sam for short, lay on my bed as I dressed for my Navy Reserves weekend. She's a 4-year-old German Shepherd, and my best friend. I rubbed her belly. Who's a good girl? My cell chirped. I glanced at the caller ID. Lieutenant McVeigh. What you need, LT? I asked, lacing my jungle boots, then tucking my BDU pants into the blousing straps. Sam leaned over the bed and gave me a slobbery kiss. Stop that. Her breath reeked. What? McVeigh asked. Sorry, not you. I rubbed Sam on the belly again. There was a short pause. Did he think someone was here? He cleared his throat. Can you get out of your drill weekend? Could really use your help. My name is Rebecca Watson. When I'm not pulling weekend warrior duty in the Navy Reserves, I'm a homicide detective for the Eugene Falls Police Department. What's the emergency? You been watching the news? No, I said. Too depressing. There was a high-speed pursuit on I-10. A Dodge Viper crashed into a van. There's at least 2 dead. Were both vehicles running from the law? Not sure, but you can ask when you get on scene. Florida Highway Patrol should be taking control of the scene, so why aren't they? Before he could answer, I asked, what is it you're not telling me? The van was transporting 3 55-gallon drums. When the collision happened, one of the drums rolled onto the interstate. The lid partially tore open. The trooper on scene shined his flashlight inside and discovered the corpse of a woman. We have a crime scene? When did this go down? Shortly after 8. The alarm clock on the dresser next to the bed indicated 8:45. The other 2 drums contained bodies? Don't know. The crime scene unit is en route. Anything else? The driver of the van sustained numerous injuries. Life flight airlifted him to a local hospital. You said man. No idea on our suspected killer? Correct. He paused. I could hear the sound of drumming fingers. Can you get out of your drill weekend? This would be the 3rd time I'd canceled over the past 9 months. We'd been short-handed in homicide since my partner's departure. Death never took a day off, but if I kept avoiding my duty to the Navy, they might decide to activate me. Far-fetched, but not implausible. A crack of thunder boomed so close to the house the walls shook. I'll look at the evidence and get back to you. Maybe I can close this case before 4. 4? That's the latest I can check in for duty. Okay, and if you can't? I'll call the reserve center. Chapter 2. I hopped into my father's vintage 1986 Jeep Renegade, God rest his soul. The wipers made a thump, thump, thump noise, trying to keep up with the torrential downpour. Not good, as weather can wreak havoc on a crime scene. I hoped the responding officers were able to protect what evidence hadn't washed away. By the time I reached the scene, vehicles clogged the westbound lanes. I veered onto the shoulder, parked behind 3 Florida Highway Patrol SUVs, and killed the engine. One trooper wearing a rain slicker directed traffic. At least the downpour had dwindled into a drizzle. Blue skies peeked between gaps in the clouds, allowing random rays of sunshine to break through. Wind whipped my hair as I exited the Jeep. I opened the door, snagged a rubber band from the center console, and pulled my hair into a ponytail. As I walked along the pavement toward the scene, a female trooper scribbled my name and badge number onto a clipboard before letting me continue. The unmistakable smell of copper associated with death permeated the air. The weather did little to dampen the odor. I followed the source, which led me to a mangled sports car, presumably the Dodge Viper the lieutenant mentioned over the phone. A tow truck pulled alongside the crumpled heap, and the driver of the truck stepped out, a heavyset guy wearing grease-stained jeans and a blue t-shirt with AC/DC emblazoned on the front. He stood picking his nose. Was he digging for gold? The concrete barrier had destroyed the Viper, which now resembled battlefield shrapnel. The left headlight dangled nearly touching the ground. Numerous cracks ran north to south along the windshield. I wonder how he'd get this heap back to the police garage so the forensics team could do their investigation. Several crime scene techs dressed in blue Tyvek suits stood near the open side door of a white van, which didn't have as much damage as the sports car. The techs were sealing 55-gallon drums for transport back to their lab. No telling if they contained dead bodies or toxic liquids, but opening them here might prove to be dangerous. A black and white box truck with crime scene investigation on the side pulled next to the van. The driver, wearing blue coveralls with CSI stenciled in white letters on the back, pushed a button and the lift lowered to the ground. He pulled a dolly from the truck and used it to move one of the drums onto the lift. The action seemed hypnotic and surreal at the same time. Traffic had been reduced from 3 lanes to 1. Onlookers gawked at the crash site as the vehicles moved at a snail's pace. 2 Florida state troopers hung out near the edge of the yellow perimeter tape. One stood over 6 feet, his muscular features evident under his uniform. The other was short and stocky. This was where my investigation would begin. "I'm Detective Watson. Can one of you give me the rundown?" Stocky looked me up and down. Then he blew a soft whistle. Being in a male-dominated club could be intimidating if you let it. I'd found remaining silent messed with their ego. After a moment, he hooked a thumb at the big guy. "Jim here is the one you want to talk to. He was first on scene." I pulled my iPhone from the belt clip, opened a recording app, and pressed record. I said my name, the time, place, and raised the cell toward him. Jim cleared his throat and began. His statement took a little less than half an hour, beginning with the chase and ending with the crash. "Did you identify the driver of the Viper?" I asked. "Gabe Goldbrinson, age 31, 2 stints in prison, one for armed robbery, the other for grand theft auto. This would be strike 3, sending him to the big house for life." He raised his hat and a hand through a mane of black hair. "Doesn't matter much now, though." "Died?" "You could say that. F. working the roadside said his body shot through the driver's side window like a missile and sailed across the median to the eastbound lane. If that didn't kill him, they heard a devastating pop as the front tires of an F-150 shattered his skull. The rear tires of the pickup smashed what remained." I didn't need to know this, but didn't say so. He was probably just trying to gross me out, get some sort of reaction. Instead, I studied the distance between the car and I-10 East. Approximately 50 feet. That's one hell of a leap. They both shrugged. "Anyone else in the car?" Jim nodded. "One passenger, identified as Alan Yoder, a.k.a. Joker, age 23, did a stint for possession of an illegal firearm." "Yoder gonna make it?" "Seatbelt saved his life. Might have saved his partner if he'd been wearing one." "Where did they take Yoder?" "Eugene Falls Medical." I pointed to the van. Jim shook his head. "Doesn't look good. One of the 55-gallon drums crushed the driver. Life flight airlifted him to Eugene Falls." I recalled McVeigh saying they hadn't identified the driver of the van. "Any ID on him yet?" "No, but the license plate came back to a Paul Kennedy." "Address?" Jim glanced at his partner, then back at me. Something didn't feel right. "What are you not telling me?" I asked. "Mr. Kennedy died 2 years ago." "How?" "Deceased is all we know." Jim didn't appear to know much, so I decided to go in another direction. "I was told the Viper caused the crash. That right?" "Other way around. The van pulled into traffic from the shoulder. The Viper collided into the van's rear end. Both vehicles lost control and slammed into the cement barriers." "Did you witness it?" "Not me specifically, if that's what you're asking." He pointed up. "Our bird in the sky shot video footage of the chase." "Where were they taking the Viper?" "Probably a chop shop, but we can't confirm." Stocky chimed in. "Maybe you could get Yoder to confess." Jim nodded. I didn't see how grand theft auto fit into my case. Sounded suspect to me. Probably trying to pass the buck. There didn't seem to be any other questions, so I reached into a pocket and handed Jim a business card. Call if you remember anything else. Stocky crossed his arms and rocked back and forth on the heels of his feet. Guess you got your work cut out for you, darling. I ignored him and walked toward Maggie Dobson, one of the crime scene techs that worked out of the Scientific Investigation Division, or SID. We graduated the police academy together, but after 3 years as a patrolman, she went back to school and earned her degree in forensic science. She had ditched the protective suit and was closing the rear door to a Chevrolet 4-door truck. Maggie. She turned. Hey, Rebecca, I see they got you working traffic control. I'm paying off a speeding ticket. Maggie smiled. Good one. She moved toward the driver door and I followed. So how can I help you, Rebecca? You lift any prints from the van in the barrels? The van was a treasure trove. Both barrels in the van had some good prints. The one on the street, she shook her head. Rain destroyed the evidence. What about the driver? I rolled his prints myself. If he's in the system, we'll identify him. Maggie hopped in the front seat and started the engine. Come by the office later. May have an update by then. As she drove off, my heart ached for the unknown victim in the barrel. I had no doubt the other 2 barrels also contained bodies. How many more victims are out there? This case deserved my full attention. I grabbed my cell and called the direct number for the commanding officer of the Reserve Center. This wasn't going to be a pleasant conversation. Chapter 3. You need to fulfill your obligation as a sailor, Chief Watson, Commander Roberts said. It's imperative that we defend our nation against terrorists. I found his statement offensive. I served 2 tours in Iraq, both times interrogating combatant insurgents. Roberts had never served outside the United States. Instead of pointing this out, I said, I understand your concern, sir, but I also have an obligation as a homicide detective. All I'm asking is to reschedule my drill weekend. You're putting me in a bind. I'm inclined to deny your request. He sighed as if this decision weighed heavily on his mind. But I'm going to grant it. Just know that sometimes there are consequences to your actions. What are you implying? Is that some sort of threat? Not at all. Only an observation. I declined to dig further. After all, he did grant the request. And if there were consequences to my so-called actions, I'd worry about them if they came up. I cleared the scene and drove back to the station to update McVeigh on the status. The sun punched through the gray, cloudy sky, and the rain stopped. The homicide division was located on the 2nd floor of the precinct, once the old courthouse. The Dix bullpen housed the workstations of 10 detectives. The place bustled with activity as detectives spoke on the phone, typed reports in their computers, or took statements from witnesses. The smell of burnt coffee lingered in the air. I decided to forego a cup and stop at Cops and Robbers later. I made my way to my desk, which overlooked the courtyard, now turned into a flower garden. The courtyard used to be the hanging square until old Sparky retired hangings in 1904. The desk facing mine had belonged to my former partner, Tony Francisco. We'd been partners for 3 years. 6 months ago, he transferred to Miami. My fault. The pain of his leaving still stung. I pressed the space key and my laptop came to life. Why was John Doe driving a dead man's van? Did he buy it from him but never register the vehicle in his own name? Was he the old man's son or distant nephew? I logged into the DMV database and searched for Paul Kennedy's driver's license. The last one on file expired 3 years before his death. The address on the license matched the one on the registration. His current wife, Irene, age 78, had an active license on file, but not much else. Satisfied I'd accomplished very little, I printed copies of my great investigative work and walked toward the back of the squad room. Light spilled through the open door of Lieutenant McVeigh's office. He sat behind a pine desk, spooning down a yogurt. The tall and lanky man who ran robbery homicide looked up. Wife's got me on a low-cal diet. Apparently, being skinny doesn't prevent you from getting high cholesterol. What I could really go for is a double cheeseburger. I nodded and then pointed to my nose. He grabbed a tissue from the box on the edge of the desk and wiped away the smidgen of yogurt. Take a seat and bring me up to speed. Not much yet. CSI took the barrels back to the lab. Both vehicles are being towed to the garage. The passenger of the Viper suffered minor injuries, and the driver is roadkill. Our suspect, ID still unknown, was flown to Eugene Falls. You going to the hospital to speak to the passenger? Check the status of our perp? Soon. Just drop by to see if you have an update on a new partner. Budget is thin, anorexic in fact. I submitted a request, but the chief hasn't approved it. Unless you have a magic wand, this case isn't going to be solved by 4. I declined to tell him I'd canceled my drill weekend. Have a little faith, will ya? LT, this John Doe had at least one dead body in a barrel. We need to figure out why and for what purpose. He pointed a spoon at me. Both excellent questions. I have no doubt you will find the answers. We also need to know if he was driving somewhere to dispose of the bodies. And if so, where? He tossed the empty yogurt container into a trash can on the side of the desk. It's not a pretty one, that's for sure. Why give it to me? You're my best detective. I ignored the remark. He probably said this to all his detectives. This investigation has crap stamped all over it. Otherwise, why not let FHP take the lead? You bring up a valid question, but this changes nothing. Work the clues, close the case. Then find me a partner. He placed his elbows on top of the desk and leaned forward. Not gonna happen, detective. If I'm to work this case, I need assistance. McVade stared at me for some time, probably trying to get an angle on the statement. He knew he'd be my go-to guy since he didn't have anyone to loan out. He spread his palms out to the side. What do you need? There it was, mine for the taking. For starters, warrants drafted for Irene Kennedy's home and any other properties in her name. I handed him the sheets of paper. He read over them. Do you really think our killer resided there? He could have simply stolen the vehicle, left his identification elsewhere as a precaution. I thought about this after leaving the scene. The chances of our killer happening upon a van registered to a dead man didn't seem feasible. Too easy. I didn't like coincidences. I stood and started for the door. Where you headed? I grinned. To work the clues. Chapter 4. When I got back in my Jeep, the sun was winning the battle of air superiority. Most of the gray clouds had retreated into the horizon, but several still hung around. I thought about dropping the top to the Jeep, but the possibility of rain changed my mind. Traffic in the city moved at a crawl. At this pace, I'd be lucky to get to the hospital in half an hour. A crimson sports car made an illegal U-turn, zipped ahead of me, then slammed on the brakes. I tried to stop, but my tires didn't bite into the slippery pavement. The unmistakable screech of metal on metal pierced the air as my bumper hit his trunk. A moment later, a tall, overweight gentleman of about 50 emerged from the car, wagging a finger at me. Instead of getting confrontational, I flipped on my police lights. His eyes widened. The thought occurred to add the sirens, but the wail might be overkill. His face turned the color of his car when he noticed the damage to his trunk. From my vantage point, mangled would be the right word to describe the aftermath of his reckless driving. I had a reinforced bumper, so I didn't sustain any damage. His car was most likely made of plastic, great for speed, but not for protection. He slammed a fist on the hood of my Jeep. Seriously? I flipped a switch and the siren chirped twice. The noise startled him, and he stopped. Cooler heads might prevail. Instead, he stomped his feet on the street, acting like a toddler. Maybe he needed a nap in lockup. As I stepped out of the Jeep, he started toward me, his face painted in anger. I flashed my badge. Truth be told, I didn't have any authority here, as cops can't take control of a scene in which they're involved, but he didn't need to know that. He took another step and pointed at me. This is all your fault. Women shouldn't be allowed to drive. Let's get something straight. You made an illegal U-turn, zipped in front of me without using your blinker, then slammed on your brakes. What did you think would happen? His eyes widened. We'll let a real cop be the judge of that. I used my turn signal. You had more than enough room to stop. Like most women, you probably on your phone. I pulled out my cell. Spittle flew from his mouth. See, you're using it now. Calling your boyfriend? With more force than usual, I punched the number into the phone, resisting the urge to glare at the misogynist. 3 rings later, dispatch answered. This is Detective Rebecca Watson, badge 1946. I'm involved in a 2-vehicle accident on Highway 98 near the intersection on Jennifer Way. No injuries. There was a short pause as a person on the other end typed on a keyboard. "A unit is dispatched your way, Detective." I thanked them and hung up. As I started to turn and walk away, a sarcastic grin spread across the idiot's face. "That's the problem with women. They run from a fight." I looked back and smiled into my dash cam. We were still live. 2 minutes later, a police cruiser pulled along the curb behind me. My cell chirped, a text message from the lieutenant. "Warrant for Miss Kennedy's home has been signed. She also has a storage locker at Master Storage off Langley Avenue." A jolt of energy coursed through me. The case had officially started. Now to keep the momentum going. After dealing with this situation, I decided to check out the home first. The guy at the hospital would remain there until he was healthy enough to be booked downtown. Either way, I knew where to find him. "What do we have?" the officer asked. Lardes put a hand on his neck and moaned in pain. "She hit me from behind. This is all her fault," he winced. "My neck hurts really bad." "Is this true?" the officer asked. I smiled. "Let's take a look at my dashcam footage." Lardes's face turned ashen. Chapter 5. 35 minutes later, I parked on the curb to 1992 Comstock Avenue. The house, approximately 800 square feet, was in dire need of a good scrubbing. The homes on the street, which all resembled each other, had popped up after the Second World War. Most still resembled the original design, but several had a garage installed or a room or two added. The bushes outside the windows needed to be trimmed, unless it was the residents' intention to use this as some sort of criminal deterrent, although I didn't think so. The barred windows should have been enough to keep out the riffraff. This area of Eugene Falls somehow escaped the rain from earlier. I cut the engine and made my way across the dirt lawn, miniature dust bombs floating into the air with each step. Sweat dripped from my brow by the time I reached the front door of the tiny dwelling. I knocked on the door and announced myself. There wasn't a vehicle parked in the yard. Maybe Irene Kennedy wasn't home. Instead of knocking again, I peeked through the only clean spot on a large window that fronted the house. A female body, naked, with a slim figure, lay sprawled on the living room floor. Several clues screamed at me. I knew from her ashen skin she no longer warranted medical attention. That, and a cord wrapped around her neck. And secondly, she was way too young to be a grandmother. I grabbed my phone and called the lieutenant. "That was quick," McVeigh said. "Mrs. Kennedy provide any help?" "We have a dead body inside." "She's dead?" "No, somebody else." A dense silence. Then he asked, "You think this is linked to our John Doe, don't you?" "Not sure, but it would be one heck of a coincidence if it's not." "Okay, stay put. I don't want you entering the house. I'll dispatch the crime scene techs, several patrol units, and the medical examiner." I hated the idea of remaining idle in case Mrs. Kennedy lay inside in need of medical assistance. But he was right. Going in without backup could be dangerous. Something slithered between my calves, startling me. Shit! Turned out to be a cat, a mangy-looking thing with tufts of black and white fur. The face looked scrunched in. I didn't know if the feline had been born with that face or was trying to give me attitude. "This your house?" The cat tilted its head as if that were the dumbest question ever asked. Chapter 6. By 12:40, police cruisers, a crime scene van, and the medical examiners surrounded the place. The disintegrating cement path in the yard were cordoned off, forcing the ever-growing crowd of onlookers to congregate into the street. This kept most of the riffraff out. Several times, someone tried to break through the barrier, but one of the patrol officers pushed them back. A second strand of yellow tape had been strung just outside the house, the inner perimeter. Sergeant Al Hudson, a middle-aged black man, barked orders at several patrolmen. Al was on the watch as commander. He'd been my training officer after I graduated the academy. The man was tough, but fair. He approached, lips in a tight line, his signature no-nonsense expression. I handed him the warrant for the storage locker in Miss Kennedy's name. "What do you want me to do with this?" "This is a warrant for the storage locker of the owner of the house. Can you send 2 officers to check it out?" He studied the warrant. "Is Mrs. Kennedy gonna cause a problem?" "Not until we find her." We watched as the vintage Nova with faded blue paint and patches of white Bondo turned onto Comstock. Black smoke billowed from the rear end as the car sputtered down the street. People slowly moved to allow the Band-Aid car to pass. The Nova pulled into a driveway across the way. When the owner cut the engine, the car backfired. Several officers flinched, as did I. But in this neighborhood, everyone who belonged appeared immune. These people were used to either vehicles backfiring or gunshots ringing out. I turned and entered the house. 2 techs were tagging and bagging evidence. Flashes of light from the crime scene photographer illuminated the corpse. The inside of the home smelled of old shoes. Not what I'd expected. The living room was sparsely furnished. A flower-patterned couch and matching love seat. A metal TV tray sat in the corner with a small television radio combo on top. A table lamp had been smashed on the floor by the electrical outlet and the cord cut. The wood-paneled walls bubbled in several places. A window air conditioning unit in the dining room pushed stagnant air across the room. Any signs of Irene Kennedy? One of the techs glanced up and said, "Except for the victim, the house is empty. Did find this, though," he said, retrieving a leather wallet from an evidence bag. I slipped into some latex gloves and flipped the wallet open. There were $200 in 20s. A driver's license identified our John Doe from earlier as John Kennedy, age 41, with puffy cheeks and sad eyes. The license listed this place as his home address. The wallet contained 3 debit cards, all bearing his name, and white business cards with gold lettering. John Kennedy Landscaping. Will assassinate your weeds. By the looks of the landscaping outside, he sucked at the job. At any rate, I needed to see if he had any partners or employees. I handed the tech the wallet, who placed it back into the evidence bag. The photographer stepped away from the victim and started taking pictures of the surrounding area. The medical examiner, Dr. Wynne Sellers, knelt over the corpse and combed through the victim's hair. Several follicles were collected on a white sheet of paper placed near the head. He folded the sheet, placed it into an envelope, scribbled some notes, and completed the process several more times. The victim lay on her back in the middle of the room. Her black leather skirt had been hiked up, legs spread wide, revealing her nudity to anyone who entered the front door. The deceased appeared to be in her early 20s, but I didn't know for sure. In death, age was relative. Then I took a closer look at the wound between her legs and almost gagged. "Yup," Wynne said. "Your Jane Doe is John Doe." Wow, I didn't want to see that. Then a thought occurred. "Did you find his manhood?" Wynne chuckled. "Manhood? Can't say I heard that term in a while, but to answer the question, not yet." I pointed to the victim's chest. "Are those implants?" "No, he was taking estrogen." This guy also had a chondrolaryngoplasty procedure. "Layman's terms, Doc." "Your victim had his Adam's apple shaved. Both steps tell me she was in the process of gender reassignment." "Think I found what's left of his penis," one of the techs said in the kitchen. She stood at the sink. "Your killer tried to use a disposal, but it got clogged." The men in the room all appeared to shudder at the same time. "I've got one more surprise for you," Wynne said, pointing at the thermometer in the victim's side. "Between lividity and the body's temperature reading, he died within the past 2 hours." I massaged my temples. I really don't need this now. "Too bad. Looks like you've got a second killer." The words hit me like a sucker punch to the gut. Another serial killer was still at large. I stepped outside for some fresh air, but only swallowed heat, thickened with humidity. A Channel 5 van pulled up to the curb. A woman with short blonde hair wearing a gray blouse and a matching skirt hopped out from the front passenger door of the news van. She moved across the street, high heels clacking on the pavement, an overweight cameraman in tow. My cell buzzed. Caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize. "Detective Watson." "Detective, this is Officer Ramsey at the storage locker. You need to come here as soon as possible." "I'm a little busy. What's the emergency?" "We discovered 10 55-gallon drums." Well, shit. This case kept getting stranger. "I need you to back out of the space and set up a perimeter. Someone will be there soon." Chapter 7. I walked to the side of the house, out of view of the press and the ever-growing crowd of onlookers. I'd never worked a case with 2 killers working as partners. I have a ruby birthstone where my wedding band used to be. Sometimes, like now, when I'm nervous, I twist it around my finger. You can do this. You can. I took a deep breath to try and calm my nerves. Didn't help. I grabbed my cell and decided to call my ex-partner. He picked up on the second ring.
What's up, Maine?
I love the way Francisco said man, because it always came out as Maine. You have a few minutes? I'm working a case, a really weird one.
How weird?
Did you happen to catch the car chase in the news this morning off I-10?
No, missed it.
The driver of a stolen Viper? He whistled.
That's a sweet ride.
Yeah, I said, a little annoyed by the interruption. Hopefully he didn't notice.
Sorry,
Francisco said.
Didn't mean to interrupt.
I smiled. He knew me so well. The driver slammed into a van that happened to be carrying 50 5-gallon drums that contained at least one dead body. He whistled again. Yeah, turns out the guy in the van had a partner who killed someone else after the chase.
You telling me you have 2 serials?
Appears so.
Wait, you said you. Are you working this case solo?
Started off that way, but McVeigh's sort of working with me.
The department hasn't hired my replacement?
Not yet. No funding. He sighed.
I'm sorry for putting you in this predicament.
The statement tied my stomach into knots. If I'd only given him a chance, we might still be together.
Even so, this has nothing to do with you not having a partner. You could work this case in your sleep. So, what is it you want?
With victims piling up and a second killer on the loose, I'm fairly certain McVeigh is going to ask for a task force.
You asking me to volunteer?
Yes. He let out a long breath. Calling him had been a big mistake. I further complicated things by asking him to come back to town. This couldn't be an easy decision for him.
I can't promise my captain will grant the request, even if McVeigh asked for me personally. There are dozens of law enforcement agencies between here and Eugene Falls.
I understand. My response sounded pathetic. Was I whining?
Tell you what, they have more detectives in Dade County than they know what to do with. Most days, I'm twiddling my thumbs to pass the day. My house is still on the market there. I'll tell my captain I need to come up for the weekend. My agent's been asking to see me anyway, so it won't be a complete lie.
My entire body tingled with anticipation. Thank you for doing this. I'll pick you up from the airport?
That's okay. I'll be fine.
That stung a little. After disconnecting, I returned to the front of the house. The cavalry had arrived. Lieutenant McVeigh leading the pack. He waved a hand and my fellow brothers and sisters in blue formed a circle around him and me. He put a comforting hand on my shoulder. This is your show, Sergeant. What do you need? I looked at each of the officers, most of them young, and 2 seasoned detectives, Craig Stone and Mark Hall. Stone was tall, white, and skinny with a mop of sandy blonde hair. Hall was black and stocky. Sunlight reflected off his shaved head. I pointed to the 2 detectives. I need you both at the storage locker. Grab one of the crime scene techs and take them with you. I'll let the ME know he may have another scene once he finishes here. They both nodded and left. I need half of you to split up and start getting statements from the crowd. The rest of you go knock on doors. If our victim died within the last 2 hours, someone saw something, even if they don't know it. They started to break away, then paused. Wynn Sellers and 2 of his assistants had exited the house, wheeling a gurney with a black body bag. McVeigh turned to me when everyone was out of earshot. You need anything from me? I recalled the business cards in the wallet. Can you look into John Kennedy Landscaping? He studied the yard. You really think he had an active business? This yard looks like shit. I'm inclined to agree with you, but he had business cards. He smiled. One of his employees could be the second killer. Precisely. I glanced back at the house. What is it? He asked. Just wondering where Mrs. Kennedy is. I feel bad for her. McVeigh glanced at his watch. It's 2:15. You call the reserve center yet? Yeah. And? I'm on the shit list. That bad? I changed the subject. I'm heading to the crime lab. The tune of children's nursery rhymes rang from behind us. I turned to see an ice cream truck cruise down the street, a figure with a shaved head and goatee behind the wheel. Several children gave chase, but the rolling popsicle stand never stopped. I grabbed a notepad from my pocket and jotted down the tag number. Another lead to chase down. Chapter 8. I pulled up to a 3-story faded white building, walked through the lobby, showed my credentials, and moved to the elevators. The Scientific Investigations Division was located on the 2nd floor. Sid worked the forensic side of law enforcement, while the detectives at the police department worked the cases. Most of the cubicles were empty when I entered the Light and Prints division. Scores of computers, monitors, modems, printers, and other state-of-the-art equipment used by Sid littered the area. A soft hum emitted from the electronics. Bundles of cables ran from the backs of the equipment down the wall and disappeared beneath the raised deck. Cold air blasted from a vent above me. Goosebumps formed in my arms. Maggie Dobson poured a cup of coffee at the end of the rectangular room. Her long, brown hair, tinged with orange streaks, was pulled into a ponytail. She saw me coming. "You want a cup? Fresh pot." "No, thanks." She sipped her coffee. "I've got an update on your case." We walked to her cubicle located at one end of the space. She shuffled through a stack of manila folders on her desk, grabbed one, and flipped it open. The van was a cesspool of evidence. The fingerprints from the steering wheel came back to a John Kennedy. He's in the system for being a scumbag. I cracked a smile. "What for?" "Peeping Tom. Those guys give me the creeps." Maggie closed the file and grabbed another. During our inspection, one of the other techs collected a strange residue on the floor. "What is it?" "Don't know yet." "You identify the girl in the barrel?" I asked. Her eyes glazed over, as if recalling a memory. What a horrible way to die. She opened the binder and passed over several photos. "I know the ME will take their own pictures, but I knew you'd want to see these before the autopsy." The first depicted a naked woman lying on her back, arms to her side. She appeared thin, maybe 100 pounds. Her hands and feet were missing. From the jagged edges along the skin showed all had been crudely severed. Her face appeared distorted, as if being hit with a blunt object. The right eye had swollen shut, and the orbital bone clearly broken. Cartilage from the nose protruded from the skin. The neck showed signs of ligature marks. The second photo had been blown and focused on the torso. Bite marks penetrated the skin on both breast, and there were 6 puncture marks along the abdominal region, probably from a knife. I shoved away a flare of anger and handed her the photos. "The other 2 barrels contain a victim in each?" "Yeah, their bodies were sent to the morgue about an hour ago. You want to look at their photos?" A lump swelled in my throat as the enormity of it all hit me. "I think I've seen enough for now." "Your killer went to great lengths to hide the identity of his victims. But why the feet is beyond me. Any ideas?" "I don't pretend to understand the human mind. I'll be sure to ask when we arrest him." Maggie closed the file and set it on the table. Moving on, the residue collected from the van was also found in all 3 victims, buttocks and back. "You think they picked it up while being transported in the van?" "That would be one way to have transference. Another could be the victims came into contact with this substance someplace else, and then their bodies were placed in the van." "The barrels from the storage locker arrive yet?" "The techs are still working the scene, but they did say only one of the drums contained a severely decomposed body. The others were empty." "Any hits on their prints?" "I was on my way to run them through AFIS when you walked in. Want to stick around?" I thought about it, but decided to go to the hospital and check on our suspect. His partner was in the wind. "I'm heading out. Call if you get anything back. I'd like to contact their families." Maggie looked as if she wanted to ask a question, but wasn't sure. "What is it?" I asked. "Another tech said there's a second killer out there. That true?" "Appears so, but we haven't released that information to the press yet." "Any idea who the other killer might be?" "Still working leads." Maggie handed me the manila file. "These women died horrible deaths, and then to have a drum as a coffin is downright heartbreaking. I hope these bastards fry." Chapter 9. After getting the room number for John Kennedy at the reception desk, I took the elevator to the 5th floor. I was the only passenger on the ride up, except for a foul odor left behind from a previous occupant. Smelled like somebody crapped their pants. The elevator dinged and the door opened. I needed fresh air, but 6 or so people waiting to board blocked the exit. I weaved and bobbed my way through the crowd in hopes of reaching better quality air. Instead, a mixture of disinfectants and questionable food invaded my nostrils. Bright, fluorescent lighting reflected off the tiled floors and white walls. An orderly pushed a cart while a middle-aged doctor flirted with several young women at the nurse's station. I bypassed the station and approached room 513. As I entered his room, a nurse attended to his machines. Several beeped. I watched from the doorway as she silenced them. She turned and spotted me. "May I help you?" she asked, her face haggard. I flashed my badge. "Do you have an update on him?" "Doesn't look good. Depressed brainstem activity. No response to pain stimuli, irregular breathing, internal injuries are extensive. If he survives the night, it'll be a miracle, poor guy. I wonder if she knew this poor guy was a monster. Part of me wanted to tell her, but I'm sure she witnessed more pain and suffering than most people. I turned to leave when I remembered something. Do you have his clothes? We bagged them, she said. Hold on. From one of the drawers, the nurse pulled out a clear plastic bag with whatever belongings were found in the suspect after arriving. Wasn't much. Jeans, pullover shirt, white socks, black steel-toed boots, and a penknife. Thank you for your time. You're welcome, Detective. I retrieved my cell and snapped a picture of John Kennedy's face. Might prove useful when we showed his picture around. Someone might recognize him, and any friends he hung out with. One of the machines beeped again. While she attended to her business, I stepped out and walked to the nurse's station. I was informed Alan Yoder was down in one of the intake rooms on the ground floor, behind the emergency room entrance. There was a long line waiting for the elevators, so I decided to walk down the stairs. When I reached the desk of the emergency room, I flashed my badge, and the person behind the counter pressed a button and the double doors swung open. The intake room consisted of 12 treatment bays, and all appeared to be occupied by patients behind closed curtains. There was organized chaos as medical staff and technicians moved from bay to bay. A patrolman sat in a chair just outside the curtain to bay 12. He was reading a Stephen King novel. Alan Yoder's in there? The patrolman glanced up. That's right. Can I help you? I flashed my badge. Go in, Detective. The lights were dim and a baseball game played on the television. The man in the bed looked in my direction. What the hell you want, 5-0? After introducing myself and reading him his Miranda rights, I got straight to the point. Where were you taking the car? None ya. What? His smile revealed a missing front tooth. None ya damn business. Okay, Yoder. Call me Joker. Where were you taking the car, slick? He crossed his arms. I ain't no snitch. Aren't you a saint? By now I'm sure you've heard your partner is dead. I don't know nothing about nothing. This guy seemed to be enjoying himself. Thing is, the more I kept him talking, the better the chances he would say something incriminating. Criminals by nature are stupid, and this guy didn't appear any different. I decided to change tactics. I get it. You're just along for the ride when the driver decided to steal the car. You didn't know. The man's eyes lit up as if he saw a way out of this. That's right. I had no idea Gabe wanted to boost the car. Boost, as in steal, correct? He nodded. He told me he had the keys, but then said his friend forgot to give them to him. What happened next? He looked around the room as if trying to snatch an answer from the air. We were driving down I-10 when a cop pulled behind us. A moment later, the lights flashed. I told Gabe to pull over. The cops would understand the situation. We didn't steal the car. What did Gabe say? He wasn't going back to prison. I nodded as if in agreement. The story had so many holes, but no reason to bring it up at this point. And the chase was on, I said. He snapped his fingers. That's right. You gotta help me. I had no idea Gabe was so crazy. I'll see what I can do. But how did you gain access inside the car? Weren't the doors locked? Oh, yeah. He had some electronic gadget I'd never seen. Did you see him use this device? Yes, but I still didn't know he planned to steal the car. So you thought maybe this was a prank? Like taking the Viper out for a spin, sort of test drive? Yeah, that's it. I remember now. He said it was all a prank. It's the God's honest truth, I swear. But when the police pulled up, Gabe said he had to take the car back to his friend. Told me if he went to jail again, he'd be part of the 3-strike rule. What you're telling me makes perfect sense. He breathed a sigh of relief. Now that his guard was down, I asked, what's the friend's name? Franklin Davenport. His eyes flashed. You bitch! You tricked me! Anything else you want to tell me? Yeah, get me a lawyer. I smiled and walked away, his obscenities echoing behind me. Although Alan Yoder hadn't provided any information toward my investigation, the statements he made would be enough to obtain a search warrant for Mr. Davenport's property. My stomach grumbled. Lunchtime had long since come and gone. Ignoring my stomach's sudden request, I decided to call the lieutenant. He picked up on the second ring.
Any update?
McVeigh asked. I thought about his question, trying to decide how best to answer him. Can you call a meeting with Stone, Hall, you and me? I'd like to compare notes, find out where we stand on the case.
Shouldn't be a problem. We'll meet in my office in 30 minutes.
Chapter 10. After a quick pit stop at some fast food joint, which didn't seem fast enough, I entered the squad room with 30 seconds to spare. Not that the lieutenant was keeping track of time, but I like to be punctual. Guess it's the military in me. A crusty Master Chief once told me 15 minutes early is on time, and on time is late. Everyone was in attendance in the office. McVeigh sat behind his desk, leaning back in his chair, hands placed across his stomach. Stone and Hall sat in 2 chairs facing the boss. The atmosphere seemed rather relaxed under the circumstances. McVeigh leaned forward. "Rebecca, why don't you kick things off?" I tossed the manila file with the photos of the victims on the desk. I've seen my share of dead bodies before, but these are some of the worst I can recall in my 14-year career. Hall opened the file and grabbed the photos. "What the hell? This is one twisted bastard." He dropped them as if they were too hot to handle. Stone and McVeigh glanced at the collage now scattered along the desktop. McVeigh winced, as did Stone, but neither commented. I spent the next half hour going over Wynne Sellers' notes from the house and my visit at the hospital. "Has anyone located Irene Kennedy?" I inquired. "Not yet," Stone said, "but it's only a matter of time." My face must have registered my displeasure. "What?" Stone asked. "It's been," I glanced at my watch, 4.5 hours, and no one has seen or heard from her?" Stone's eyes narrowed. "Your point?" "I believe she's dead." McVeigh rubbed his chin. "So you think she's another victim?" "I didn't say that. For all we know, Miss Kennedy will pull into her driveway at any time. Or maybe she heard the news." Hall snapped his fingers. "She's our second serial killer." His answer sounded ludicrous and plausible at the same time. Homicides were nothing more than smoke and mirrors. "Makes sense," Stone said. Hall nodded. "I'll draft an arrest warrant on her." "Let's not go half-cocked." All 3 looked at me as if I'd grown a third eye. "The woman is 78. You expect anyone to believe she overpowered our John Doe, murdered him, and then what? Disappeared without a trace?" Hall arched a brow. "She could have poisoned him." "Homemade cookies," Stone said. "My grandma makes the best oatmeal raisin. No one would think twice if she laced them with rat poison." "Then what?" I asked. "She just so happened to strangle him with the cord from a lamp?" Hall shrugged. "It could happen." "Or what about an alternate theory?" Stone said. "Didn't the ME say the man's wiener was lopped off? Let's say he wanted a sex change but couldn't afford it. So Grandma Kennedy says she can be of assistance, but things go wrong." I rolled my eyes. "You're kidding." Stone grinned. "It's a working theory." I shook my head. "First of all, they don't lop off the wiener, as you so eloquently stated. Plus, our John Doe would have gone through a number of procedures to get ready for the transition. There's no way he would agree to let Mrs. Kennedy do what you're suggesting. This is a moot point anyway. His penis was chopped off post-mortem." "What, you mean they don't chop off the penis for a sex change operation?" Hall asked. I'm not going to dignify that with an answer. "But now I'm curious to know." "Google it." "Okay," Stone said with a hint of sarcasm. "Then tell us your theory." "I'd say our killers are snatching women, binding them, and torturing them over a span of days or possibly weeks. But our second serial killer snatched a man instead of a woman. But I doubt he realized this until returning to the Kennedy residence. Once he learned of his mistake, he became enraged and murdered him, then left for reasons unknown. Maybe to go to the storage locker to grab a barrel. On the way there, or possibly on the way back, he hears about the accident on I-10 and realized it involved his partner. Either way, he couldn't go back to move the body." "Sounds thin," Stone said. "Plus, you can't account for the absence of Mrs. Kennedy." McVeigh held up a hand, not to ask a question, but to quell the infighting. "This meeting is getting off topic. We can discuss Mrs. Kennedy later, but let's move on." He looked at me. "You got anything else to add?" "Did you find anything about the landscaping business?" "It's a dead end. The business license was under Paul Kennedy and wasn't renewed after his death." I expelled a long breath. And yet, his son made business cards anyway. About the author. James Glass achieved the rank of Command Master Chief before retiring after 22 years in the United States Navy. After retiring from the Navy, he exchanged his rifle for a pen. He and his family moved back to Florida. James is also the president of the Panhandle Writers Group. Check out his website at www.jamescglass.com and discover his other books.